Stories come to life as we follow up on our friends and community partners who have been featured in CSUN Today.
It's Mechelle Best, and I am the Interim Dean of the College of Health and Human Development. This series is brought to you by our college's Reputational Pillar Committee. This interview is being recorded and will be shareable after the event. Today we have with us Adrienne Borlongan, class of 2009, and her husband, Jon-Patrick JP Lopez, class of 2008. They're co-founders of the artisanal ice cream business, Wanderlust Creamery. And let me just add that Adrienne is an alumna of our Family and Consumer Sciences department. Wanderlust Creamery offers a set of signature selections and introduces new menu flavors every month. The magic behind the handcrafted flavors, which have been recognized by publications such as Insider, Food and Wine, and USA Today, isn't magic at all. It's chemistry. Borlongan, who spent her days at CSUN studying the science behind food, said she never trusts an existing external recipe for ice cream. Instead, she looks to textbooks and her own experimentation, which involves testing taste and texture. In February 2020, just prior to the pandemic, CSUN Today featured Adrienne and JP in a story about their journey as founders of Wanderlust Creameries. And today we're going to talk to them about what has transpired since that story was published, as their story comes to life. Adrienne and JP, thanks so much for joining us. We are really excited to bring your story to life today. I'm going to start by asking some questions, and then at the end of our conversation, we'll open it up to the audience for questions as well. In the meantime, if you're in the audience and you have a question, feel free to type it into the chat so that we can ask those questions in a few minutes from now. So much has happened since that CSUN Today story. I would say the world is almost in a different place. And we are certainly curious about how things have been going for both of you and for your business. But for the persons in our audience who may not have read your story, who may not have known anything about Wanderlust Creamery before deciding to join us today, I just want to ask, before we get into the meat of it, why ice cream? And did you ever think years ago that ice cream would be in your future and this is where your business would be?
To be honest, I have no idea why it ended up being ice cream. I've always had an obsession and passion for food. And I would go through phases where I'd become obsessed with one thing. And in 2014, late 2014, I don't know why I became obsessed with ice cream. I go through phases where it's like, oh, I'm obsessed with cocktails, and now I'm obsessed with macaroons. And I would always pass it, but run it by JP. Like, do you think this is a good business? And he'd be, I don't know. But for some reason, when I mentioned my obsession right now is ice cream, and he thought about it, he's like, that's actually a really good business model because it doesn't spoil. It's a frozen product. It's easy to make.
So we thought.
What were your thoughts on when I presented you with ice cream? Why did you say? What made you say yes?
I mean, nothing specific about ice cream, but more so just, you know, she's had all these other ideas in the past and they kind of just fizzled out with time. And this one seemed a little bit more serious because there was a little bit more like learning and developing that she was doing on the inside. And she ended up buying like a high-end ice cream maker, like an actual like commercial ice cream maker for like home use. And it seemed more real and it seemed more like realistic that we could actually do something with it. And so it was just kind of like also just might as well push her in that direction regardless.
Okay, and so how do you feel that Wanderlust Creamery is doing now? How do you see yourself in the world of hospitality and dining going forward?
I think we're doing better than we had, potentially expected after the pandemic. Obviously, when the pandemic started, the entire food world got turned upside down, and any type of food business had to kind of make adjustments and changes with how they did things, how they made things, etc. And we obviously made our adjustments on the fly. We started selling pints online, really focused on pre-packaged pints, and developed our online store, which is actually continuously growing. Made changes to how we made our product, how we source our product, how we purchase things. So it kind of just made us look internally and try to find ways to kind of save money. Obviously, during the pandemic, everyone was trying to figure out a way to do that, and it's worked out well for us. We opened 2 stores during the, I guess we're still in the middle of the pandemic. We opened one in June of 2020, and then we're opening one in about 2 weeks. Then we have 2 more in the pipeline within the next 12 months. So we've actually, we took a bad situation, figured out a way to make it better for us. And it actually worked out better because what we learned during the pandemic, we're able to go, oh, we can actually scale this better now because of what we learned by the changes we did during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Certainly some interesting ways that you adapted to keep your business open. But when we think about ice cream, we don't think about something that ships well. And I know a number of restaurants turn to deliveries and so on, to just ordering online or ordering by phone, and then you could just come in and pick it up. But you spoke about taking parts of your business online, and I'm curious about how the online part of your business works and what products you're selling online and how you're getting them delivered to your customers. Yeah,
it was kind of a crazy trial and error because when we thought of the idea, we had no idea what we were doing. To be honest, we actually ordered ice cream from our competitors to kind of reverse engineer what they were doing. And so we knew it involved a styrofoam box and dry ice, but not really how much dry ice. So we were just doing like basic tests, like leave dry ice in a box and see how long it lasted kind of tests. And and then on top of that, we didn't know how many pints we were going to sell online. And initially we had really undershot how much we were going to do online, and we ended up selling our first batch of pints out in like 20 minutes. And it kind of created a bit of a stir for us because like it's really hard for us to make pints. It's a different type of process than making it into like a larger tub. But it was a lot of trial and error, a lot of mistakes along the way, a lot of melted ice cream for the first couple hundred customers. I think our second run, half of the deliveries melted.
Yes.
And then we ended up like having to resend everything out. So I don't think we made much money early on, but we've since figured it out, and we're actually working in a new direction with it. We don't actually handle it anymore. We hired like a third-party logistics company who's a professional at shipping ice cream. So I think that's where that is now. So it's worked out. So the pandemic really pushed you to be even more entrepreneurial, even more innovative, and it really challenged you. And I'm curious about how many of the changes that you were really pushed to make during the pandemic you will continue to use in your business going forward.
Almost everything.
Almost everything.
Yeah. The pandemic also stopped, like when you have a business that's going, you're so busy with the everyday stuff that that you could be operating more efficiently. But
we just don't have the time to sit down and look under the hood and make those adjustments.
Yeah, but with the pandemic, it kind of slowed things down for us. So we had the time to be more introspective and go back and go back to our to-do list or our wish list and check things off that list because we had the time.
Albeit really scary.
Yeah.
Because we did have a lot of time, but at the same time, we didn't have a lot of time. We had to figure out those adjustments. So it was like, our backs were up against the wall, so to speak. But I mean, I guess it's like when you procrastinate a little bit, you kind of work your best in a way. So our backs were up against the wall, but it ended up working out really well.
Mm-hmm. Pressure can sometimes be really beneficial. Some of us deadlines help us a lot.
Yeah.
So for most of us, things really started to change around February and March of 2020 in terms of, shutting down and going virtual and doing business online and so on. And I know certainly at CSUN and for students, those first few months were really rough. when did you get to the point where you felt like, okay, we kind of have a handle on this and we know we can do this and we can keep our business open and we can continue progressing? When did you reach that point?
I want to say mid-April.
2020?
Mid-April, right?
Maybe like April, May 2020, we figured out a solution that could, it was kind of in stages. 2020, obviously, like immediately when the pandemic started, once we figured out our pint solution and we saw the first initial runs that we were doing and how successful it was, we knew that we could use this to float us through any period in time where, I mean, food concepts were essentially shut down. No one's really going to the stores. And we knew it would float us. So for 2020, the pint program that we call it our pint program, it floated us through 2020, but come 2021, around March, April, when the world started kind of slowly becoming a little bit normalized, having our pint program and making the changes internally with how we did things. I think about March, April of 2021 is when we started to kind of see a turnaround towards normal.
Okay. I'm going to shift a little bit now so I can focus a bit on CSUN. And I really want to know how you think your education at CSUN prepared you for the entrepreneurial roles you took on, and how they help you to persist and innovate to keep your business moving forward.
You know, that's a tough one, because if I'm going to be honest, like I look back at what my mindset was as a student, and it's hard to really truly be entrepreneurial and a student at the same time, because and it's no offense to school or anything. I mean, it's necessary because you do learn skills, but when you're a student, you're kind of, in a sense, like an employee mentality, where you have deadlines, you have a boss, your teacher, and you have to do things according to them. And an entrepreneur doesn't really think like that. And they're not going day to day on someone else's time, rules, and do as I say. An entrepreneur, you're kind of just thrown into the wild. So while I learned all these skills in the business program, I even became an attorney after college, and I still didn't know I was doing after an attorney, but not until I actually started a business and was really faced with a problem, like, what am I doing? Like, I remember looking back and remembering old accounting classes and how things are supposed to be set up. And I kind of pieced it all together. So it's really, you got to take yourself out of the student mode and really put yourself into a different, I guess, way of thinking. And it's challenging, because I know obviously I was a student, and I know it's challenging to kind of snap out of that. And I know Adrienne has a kind of similar take on that too.
Yeah. I mean, I learned a lot of important things, but I feel like I couldn't really put them to use until out in the real world. I didn't really, I learned concepts, but I didn't really fully understand them and how to use them, in a real life context until after.
So JP's background is in business, and learning those concepts were critical in some way, in terms of having the knowledge that you could then apply while you're doing the entrepreneurial stuff that you couldn't necessarily easily do when you were a student, because of the many constraints of being a student. And then Adrienne, the knowledge that you gained through the FCS program may not necessarily have been about entrepreneurship, but more about how you create the product that you actually have. So could you tell us a bit about that?
Yes. I think having a food science background really helped me in developing the products, because I would pick up, for example, I would go and I bought like 10 ice cream textbooks. I'm sorry, I bought 10 ice cream cookbooks, and I would look at the recipe, and I just looking at the recipe, not even making it, I already knew this isn't going to work. I would just know, the measurements are by volume. And in food science, you learn everything needs to be by weight. Just like basic fundamental understanding of of what sugar does to a recipe, what fat does to a recipe, what water does to a recipe. And so I think that really helped me. I think had I not had that food science background, I would have gone through trial and error with those cookbooks and wasted months making those recipes and finding out it doesn't really work. That's why I went straight to textbooks, because I knew that that's where you're going to find real valuable information on how to make a product, how to achieve a certain consistency, how to achieve a certain texture. I don't know. I just feel like I had a more complete understanding.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, the way we operate our business, it's kind of like left brain, right brain. I don't touch anything on the creative side and on the food production side. And just kind of watching her develop products, I could tell, because I know how to read a recipe from a cookbook. I mean, everyone does, but it's just the way she looked at the production of ice cream from a more scientific basis versus just someone following a recipe. I think that really put us at a better starting point, because foundationally she had a more scientific approach to producing ice cream, and it really helped us grow. Because when you're making ice cream, things get scaled and scaled and scaled, and it's not a recipe that scales. It's more of a scientific process that scales. And I think it was really beneficial for us from that side of the coin.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was thinking about too, because quite often a recipe in a cookbook, when you try to scale it up, it's not quite the same as when you cook it for 4. And so having that scientific understanding of how all of the different ingredients work would probably have been really, really beneficial as you try to do recipes on a much larger scale.
Yes.
Okay. Well, now let's open up the floor to the audience to ask some questions, and I will go to the chat and see if there are any questions there for us. If you're in the audience and you want to ask a question and it's not in the chat, feel free to raise your hand and we can open up your mic so you can ask that question live. There's someone who says they've been to your store and the flavors are unusual and the quality is great. And I don't know who that is, but somebody is giving you props.
Thank you.
Let's see who is in the audience. I see Dr. Kai is on live. Does that mean you have a question for us, Tom?
I don't have much of a question. I just want to say to both of you, we are so proud of you. This is just amazing. About food science, as Adrienne knows, this is a hidden gem, and hidden gem on this whole CSUN campus. A lot of students, they know nutrition, it's a popular topic. But, not many of them know about food science.
Yeah.
This is just amazing major. It's about the science behind the quality control, about, the production of all the food items. So this is just amazing. I just want to ask what kind of advice you could give for the current students, for the fellow students of food science or FCS in general,
I would say just be open. I would say, your objective going to school is not just learning, it's also to be inspired. And so I know a lot of classes that inspired me, and I look back and I see how those inspirations led me to this point. Everyone that I was studying food science with was interested in being, a dietitian or nutritionist. And while I had an interest in that, I had more of an interest in how do I make food taste better? How do I make things more delicious? And so that's kind of what inspired me to get to this point.
And that brings us an excellent segue to the question that's in the chat, because Catherine Lee is asking, what inspires your new flavors?
Well, we're ice cream inspired by travel. So honestly, I'm inspired by my own personal wanderlust. That was the beginning, but more recently, we have 3 kids. We haven't been able to travel much, and, running a business involves a lot of work. So more recently, a lot of our inspiration comes from our customers and our fans. They'll kind of like write me an email like, I'm Armenian and I grew up eating this. My grandma would make me this, and I would do a little bit of research, and then I would ask my Armenian friends, does this sound like an ice cream flavor that's true to the original dish? And they'd be like, yeah, and I'll have them try it, stuff like that. I'm also inspired by what's going on socially. So right now we have a Ukrainian flavor. It's called Kievsky. It's like their national dessert. It's like a nut meringue cake. I'll also be inspired by certain holidays. So, St. Patrick's Day just passed. We had an Irish brown bread flavor. Easter is coming up. So I'm thinking of, what are some traditional Easter desserts from around the world, and how can I translate that into an ice cream? It comes from, originally started as travel and wanderlust, but it's kind of like snowballed into this bigger picture of how do I share the world's cultures, and broaden people's minds through something as simple as ice cream.
That's quite amazing. So I have a couple of follow-up questions to that. First, can you tell us the most interesting flavor you created from a place that you visited?
I think the fig leaf was pretty novel.
So we went to Croatia, and it's just off the Mediterranean, and a lot of people aren't familiar with Croatian food, but I would say that it's a cross between Italian and Eastern European almost. But I remember when we were there, we had a dish. It was cheese, sheep's cheese, and it was wrapped in the leaves of a fig tree. And it was kind of like wrapped like a tamale, and then it was grilled, and then table side, they open it up for you and they drizzle honey on top and they sprinkle pistachios. And I remember thinking like, this is weird. I've never heard of fig leaf, like leaves from a fig tree being edible or having any flavor. And it almost tasted like coconut. It's indescribable. It's almost like coconut. And so when I came back, actually made an ice cream. We had a fig tree in our backyard, made an ice cream with the leaves, infused it with the leaves from the fig tree, and it, sweetened it with honey, put pistachios in it, and it just takes us back to that meal we had in Croatia. I think and even to this day, when we bring it back on our seasonal menu, people are like, I didn't know you could eat fig leaves. I've had figs, but I didn't know you could eat. I'm like, yeah, neither did I. And I didn't learn that until I went to Croatia.
Okay, and then it sounds like the customer interaction part of it is also amazing, because you're hearing from your customers what their interests are, what their delights in terms of desserts and so on are, and trying to make that into an ice cream. So other than the social justice pieces, which I think are, just really, really commendable, what other types of desserts or ideas or feelings or senses have your customers shared with you, and how do you take something that's really not tangible and make it into an ice cream flavor?
Maybe white rabbit.
Yeah, white rabbit. So we've made I notice another big theme with our customers and our following is nostalgia. Like they want to be taken back to their childhood. But nostalgia from people that aren't mainstream, I want to say, like, of course, every American shares in, nostalgic things, but, as an Asian growing up in America, there's things that from my childhood that not everyone would recognize. And one time somebody suggested to me that there's this candy called White Rabbit. It's a candy from China, but a lot of Asians grew up eating it. And it's basically like a white Tootsie Roll almost. And it, if anyone eating it, they would just say, oh, it just tastes like vanilla, just tastes like plain vanilla, almost like a synthetic fake vanilla almost. But to Asian Americans, it's very nostalgic. It just takes them back to their childhood. And I made it as a flavor after someone suggested I did. And, you know, a lot of people didn't get it. A lot of people were like, it just tastes like
McDonald's soft serve.
McDonald's soft serve. But then once I posted the photo of, you know, the ice cream with the wrapper, I mean, we had people driving all the way from San Jose. Like I saw you guys had this flavor. I had to have it. And it's weird. It's like, you know, people who don't know White Rabbit, they'll have it and they don't get it. But people who grew up having it, it's just like, it's an emotional thing for them. So I think it's crazy. I've learned that food is really powerful. There's a power to food, an emotional connection to food.
And it certainly is a fantastic way to connect with your customers. Because it's not then just about them buying your product. It's that you're actually listening to them and understanding what they want and then producing something that meets that. And how many businesses do that? Businesses focus on their customers to that extent. That really is setting you apart from other places. Because, you know, I've never been to Baskin Robbins and had somebody ask me what my favorite childhood memory is and try to make it into ice cream.
Yeah.
So this is, you know, really phenomenal thing that you're doing here. Are there any other questions from the audience? Do we have anything in the chat? Does anyone want to ask a question before we wrap up, because we're quickly running out of time?
Just want to add, I would love to try your White Rabbit ice cream, because I'm still buying that from online to give to my kids. It's really just like you said. It's just the childhood memory, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
I really appreciate that kind of a cultural perspective you put into the whole thing. So thank you.
I'd like to know, how do you decide which flavors to keep carrying over and which ones are just seasonal and come and go? And do you just keep adding flavors?
Well, a lot of what stays on the signature menu is actually dependent on him. If he'll do the numbers and costing, and he'll be like, you know, there's a good margin on this flavor. This is going to be a signature flavor.
It's not just about money. I mean, we try to offer like a well-rounded, balanced signature menu. It's just part of my side of the business is making sure like there's certain flavors don't put us under. She tried to make pistachio once, and it would be like us giving $1 away with every scoop of ice cream.
Just because I only want to use pistachio paste from a specific region in Italy,
and it's
very
absurdly expensive.
So that's why you'll never see. There's some flavors you'll never see. It's because he said no.
Well, that leads to another question in the chat from Mary Knapp. How much does it cost to ship with dry ice over the cost of the product?
Oh, wow. It's, you know, when we first started, we didn't really have, you know, obviously everything is in scale and how much you buy in bulk. But when we first started buying the shipping containers, it will cost us like $3.50 for a box, and then $8 for a styrofoam container that goes in the box. And then we didn't have a dry ice purveyor at the time, and so we're buying it for like $1 a pound, and you need about 12 pounds. So we would charge like, I think $20 in shipping in like California. We'd only do California, but it would cost us almost $30 to ship. So we're actually losing a little bit of money, but we made it make sense with, because from a bit on our budget that we created for it. And since then, we've been able to like buy things at scale to kind of shrink our costs to hopefully lower our shipping costs. But the dry ice portion was kind of expensive for a while, because actually during the pandemic and when the vaccine rollout came out, a lot of the dry ice was being allocated towards hospitals. And so there would be like weeks at a time where we couldn't get dry ice and we couldn't even ship online. A bunch of orders got pushed back a couple of weeks. And so dry ice has kind of been a bit of a commodity in the food shipping world in the last 2 years.
Mm-hmm. But recently we've taken on a third-party fulfillment, and that's allowed us to really decrease our shipping costs, because they have other customers that use dry ice. So they're buying a dry ice at scale, which makes it cheaper. They're also fulfilling out of the middle of the country. I think it's Ohio.
Yeah.
Where labor is much cheaper. Also, the shipping rate, from Ohio to New York is much cheaper than had we shipped it here from Los Angeles.
Yeah. For example, like when we would ship to New York, I think just the shipping cost alone with like FedEx was like $55. But we couldn't charge that. I think we tried to make it reasonable, but the shipping charge with the box was around like $70-something, but we would charge like $45 in shipping or something like that. And we just thought it was too much money. And so like now we have a third-party logistics company kind of somewhere in Ohio. So now it's kind of like, now we're able to charge like $25 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So to make it more reasonable, because it's kind of unreasonable to charge that much for shipping, but there's kind of just no choice. We didn't have a choice at the time.
Well, Mary says, thank you for the answer. And she can't wait till she feels safe to come back in person. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Dean Best.
Thank you, Dean. I have one final question before I close. You mentioned there's some flavors that never even get to the store because maybe they don't work or maybe they're too expensive. But have you had flavors that made it to the store and then afterward you're like, no, we're never going to sell this flavor again?
Yeah, I know there's one or two. She made a black truffle flavor.
Yeah,
it just smelled like dirty socks. And then one, she made
I think I made a Cuban inspired flavor. It was tobacco leaf with chocolate. Yeah. It didn't, some people liked it and some people didn't.
Yeah. And then there was one, it was like a kabocha squash. No, the persimmon one.
Persimmon.
It just looked like baby food, like Gerber baby food. That was a long time ago. So.
Yeah.
We made a lot of mistakes early on.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. It's been a real pleasure to have you here. Thanks for spending some time with us and talking about your experiences a bit on campus, but more about Wanderlust Creameries. It's exciting that your business has grown even during the pandemic and that you have projections to continue growing. And it's just a fine example of what's possible when you think about what you really want to do and you pursue it.
Yeah. Definitely.
Again, thank you so much for being with us. And I look forward to coming into one of your stores and trying out some of your flavors and maybe touching base with you a couple of months from now to see how things are going.
For sure. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Students and staff and faculty in the audience, have a wonderful rest of your day. And thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.